Boy oh boy, you just gotta love to see it, right? Legendary Studios showing us time and time again that they are fully tapped into the community and making changes in relation to what the community views of previous changes. And it's a wonderful thing to see, continue to be done as Legendary Studios continues to grow. Now, this is obviously going to be a sort of news recap, right? We're going to go through some of the articles here. But if you didn't know, these are part of the retailer news section, right? So chances are, if you're following the Legendary Studios news and the news surrounding Flesh and Blood, you can make your way over to the articles tab. Now, the article tab is fantastic, but not all of the news articles relating to retailers and marketing make their way over to that section. So if you didn't know, go to retailers and go to retailer news. Wonderful, wonderful section to view because it really shows the outlook of LSS as a company and the overall retailer perspective of the game, which, directly reflects the community. So the one we want to discuss today is this, the use of organized play materials policy update. But along with that, I do also want to talk about some changes made to the retailer supply policy, as well as the history pack. And I guess we might as well just chuck in the buy box promos in there as well. Okay, so starting off, the use of organized play material, right? So they have, again, tweaked things. And this is really, really good because by and large, this article is just outlining their continued support for the casual play states of Flesh and Blood, right? The incentive for your local game store to run just casual events, even if they don't necessarily have a competitive scene, which is great. Personally, I don't know how it is directly in the US, but here in Australia, we had a lot of stores take on Flesh and Blood up until Monarch, and then a lot of stores decline, right? So overall, the play state or the play environment here in Australia has dwindled and is starting to regrow, and it's a bit of a disconnect if they're jumping just into the competitive play, given how much the competitive scene has grown. So seeing support for the casual side of things to actually allow stores to run these casual events with full support from LSS is fantastic. So the major changes outlined in this article are the policy relating to the resale of organized play material, right? So all of the promos or giveaways or prizes, if you will, that Legendary Studios provides the competitive scene generally to use within competitive events, not necessarily casual. But the big change that we obviously want to discuss and we are talking about is this. Any number of Armory events per month may now be run as casual play events. So previously, there was a cap of 2. Now it's extended to include all Armory events. So once every week, you can have a casual event at your local game store, and it can be fully supported by the prizes provided by LSS. Overall, this means that there is a greater amount of flexibility for local game stores to try and indoctrinate players into Flesh and Blood, right? They don't have to jump into the competitive side of things. They can have a series of casual events to try to rope in new players to make it more player friendly rather than having to go, net deck something or spend a chunk of change on high value meta cards, right? We can have smaller LGSs run a series of casual events every month rather than competitive events and still take full advantage of the prizes that LSS provides them with for those events. So summed up nicely, this means that stores may choose to run any of their 4 Armory events per month as competitive or casual. Competitive events award the Cold Fall promo for the first place players, whereas casual events award the Cold Fall promo as a random draw prize. Rainbow Foil promos should be awarded to either the top placing player or as participation prizes at the store's discretion. So that flexibility as well is great, right? Because again, we can just have a prize for showing up. Everyone is participating, having a fun, casual time, and someone gets to walk away with the Cold Fall promo. Similarly, you can then introduce a little bit of competitiveness to the casual play events, right? Okay, you can have obviously rankings and placings, but you can have it a lot more friendly. You could just have your store designate MVP players, someone who shows up and encourages everyone. You could really just decide how you want to reward the players participating with these rainbow foils, again, as participation prizes. So this overall flexibility that LSS is now providing with their affiliated stores is fantastic to see. Because again, one of the weak points in the current era of Flesh and Blood is the onboarding of new players, and having casual friendly events is a wonderful thing for that. Which actually also segues to something else I do want to touch on that isn't really part of the articles just yet. I'm sure it'll show up eventually. So we have coming in September, I believe, a set of pre-con decks from Tolarian Community College, right? The professor has joined up or teamed up with Legendary Studios, right, in collaboration, and are presenting a segment of pre-con decks, just going to be all around a fun time. These are going to be the first real sort of valued decks that we're going to see. Now, I know this can be a little bit jarring, right? For a lot of people, seeing something like the professor, for instance, a real person embodied in the game, can be a bit off-putting. But at the same time, something that I really want everyone to consider is, again, a lot of card games, TCGs, are built on predicating fandoms, right? Magic has its extensive lore that has been built up, but Flesh and Blood doesn't have that luxury of time. Yu-Gi-Oh! Relies on its animes, same with Pokemon, Digimon, One Piece, they all have a community to fall back on. Flesh and Blood is building itself from scratch, so why can't it tap into the ginormous community centered around some pivotal characters, right? So the first obvious example of this is the Rudy promo card. Now that isn't necessarily playable, right? It's very memey, it's very gimmicky, but it is still a Legend Story Studios produced card using a real figure. In that same vein, we have the Professor's deck. Now, this looks like it's from a distributor, right? So someone advertising for you to put in your purchase orders. So we have Community College for this new set. So it should be in tandem with the 11th set of Flesh and Blood. Players can play as the Professor in a high-tech Evo mech suit, as well as a Bard named Melody and a Guardian named Brevet. The set comes with 4 ready-to-play Blitz decks with over 100 new cards, a 24-inch rubber playmat, and a 1,000-count storage box. Okay, so this is our first sort of example of a bundle product for Flesh and Blood. And I know a lot of us have sort of been discussing and advocating for Legend Story Studios to start expanding their range of products, right? They don't have to go into the excessive territory of, say, Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon, but there needs to be some variety and some other modes of consumption for the consumer. Now, I assume it's between the 4 decks that we have 100 new cards, and I do expect all of them to be completely legal, and I personally have no issue whatsoever with, putting these characters into the lore of Flesh and Blood. I think, again, that's a fantastic thing to reward the people who have been pivotal to the growth of Flesh and Blood, right? I think it's a fantastic thing to see. I think it is a excellent idea to, again, tap into the wider communities that, sort of fringe on Flesh and Blood, right? Not everyone who follows the Professor plays Flesh and Blood, right? The majority are from MTG, but this is a excellent way, right, that isn't as money grubby, if you will, as, for instance, the Lord of the Rings from MTG, to have a bit of fun and sort of coerce those players to come and join in. Now, I don't want to see these just be reskins, right? So we know that the Professor loves his Dash, okay? So I don't want him just to be a reskin hero card of Dash, right? I want to see him be a new Mechanist card for Blitz, right? Blitz, by and large, has the most branching creativeness, right? We have a lot more heroes to pick from than Classic Constructed, and so we can get a bit more creative and a bit more fun with their abilities. So I think having the Professor do something unique would be great, even if it's centered around the Dash Voltron cards, right? Because I know he gravitated towards them greatly in Dynasty. Altogether, it should be interesting, especially having a Blitz deck for the Bard, right? Because it means we're going to see a substantial amount of cards enter play for the Bard, and it can sort of hint at the Bard appearing in the 11th set. Right, so that aside, we can go back and we can touch on some of the other retailer news articles. The big one that I do want to sort of look at first is the retailer supply policy update. Right now, in Australia, these aren't observed, the amounts of price disparity between the recommended sales price and the minimum advertised price. But for the US, right, the big change is History Pack 1 now has a large discount, so the boxes can be sold for even cheaper. Same with the Classic Battles, Reiner vs. Dorinthia. Still surprised we are yet to see another one, right? I personally would have thought they just churn them out. And then, of course, Dust Till Dawn is just being applied to the normal MAP policy. Now, typically, the discount is 20%, right? So the recommended price, I'm going to use Australian because I don't know the US off the top of my head, but for the history packs is 180, I believe. So 180, you can usually take 20% off that and advertise that price, right? So that would make it take $36 off. so 46, so $146. Right, you can now take a further 15% off that price, meaning that we are seeing some more encouragement for people to participate in the history pack, right, and the classic battles decks, which obviously have a really substantial card for Dorinthia. Pretty sure that, you know, at some point these decks are going to be worth picking up simply for the, what was it, Glistening Steelblade? The history pack ties into the next one, right? So history pack, looking to the future. Probably be the last thing. You know what, we'll touch on the buy box quickly. So buy box, right, with Dusk Till Dawn coming out, we see the Banneret? Is that right? Banners. I'm just going to say banners because that's what they are to me. I'm sure this is a correct word, right? French or Spanish or something like that. But yeah, okay, so these are the cards available with the Dusk Till Dawn boxes. Now, of course, Rudy has his own buy box promo, and I'm pretty sure Team Covenant do as well. I might be wrong on that one, but yeah, they are incentivized for people to use with in-store purchases, not online. Which sucks for me because again, I am rural, so all my boxes are coming online. I have generally gotten a few with the boxes I order. I try to broaden my horizon and order from a bunch of places to try and get some of the promos. If not, given the new update to the other policy that we touched on before and didn't really go over, right, the use of organized play material, there's now a shorter window before those products can be reused or resold. So chances are I probably can pick up the whole packet of 12 eventually. I did that similar to Crew and Arcane Rising, right? The weapon cards. So fingers crossed, because I do like collecting the promos, again, for the sake of just having them. But yes, history pack. Looking forward to the future. Last thing to sort of go over, right? So its purpose is to make sure that players and collectors still get access to the classic cards they need moving forward. I think collectors is an interesting one to tack on there, right? Because the whole point of the history product is not for collectors. It's just to make cards accessible for players. I guess if you want a full white border collection master set, go ahead. Personally, I will never touch the products. I really don't see their value. They're more of a long-term play, which is fine. But yeah, I would rather see the demand filtered into the boxes of Arcane Rising, Crew, and Welcome to Wraith, because again, although they're out of print, they are not out of demand or inaccessible to people. But coupled with the further discounts that the US is now allowed to do, and again, the US market does sort of drive the Australian market, so obviously our taxes work a bit different, and everything like that, and also currency conversion. But if, you know, I can get a box cheaper from a TCG Player or any of those secondary markets, a lot of stores factor that in and try to be competitive. For instance, the biggest one to me is Gameology. They're so quick on the pickup if anything starts to go up in price, right? They must have them attached to any of those systems, right? So they can see the information and correct their advertised prices quickly. And then, of course, every buy list, by and large, uses binder POS, which is generally then connected with TCG Player in terms of card values. So what I would like to see is that we continue to see the History Pack 1, you know, move away from its connected price to the unlimited boxes. Because again, you know, cards like Command & Conquer, Enlightened Strike, Art of War, the Tunic, they're not as cheap as what I would like them to be for the history product to do its job. And then similarly, the unlimited versions aren't growing as quickly as what I would like, right? They're sort of cannibalizing each other's interests and keeping each other a lot closer than what they should be. So hopefully the increased discount should help out with that. But again, some stuff I want to just touch on, which I've said a lot before, right? So the History Pack 1 contains several sought-after reprints of chase cards from previous sets that see regular play today, and then they're listing them. The issue that, again, I have with this is the set is over-curated, right? You're sifting through a larger selection of cards to find these chase cards, if you will. And then in terms of commons and rares, well, their price point isn't substantial enough that I would, you know, go get a history box just to find them. It'd be simple enough just to go and buy the unlimited versions at the time being. Again, in terms of future prospects, history packs will definitely be needed, but I don't think next year is the right time for the Monarch through Everfest history pack, and I don't think the current time is the right time for History Pack 1. Right, History Pack 1 coming out, you know, even the end of this year to next year would have been, I think, better from my point of view. Yes, it would have put strain on prices and everything like that, but we would have seen a lot more growth, a lot healthier growth. And also, there would have been greater opportunities to do more basic reprints, if you will, in sets. The big one, obviously, that we should probably talk about, and I'll touch on once we actually go through the cards, is the Crown of Providence in Dusk Till Dawn. But that's just my personal opinion. Again, I don't like what the history pack is meant to accomplish and how it goes about accomplishing it, but I do see its purpose and I do see its value. The other big concern that I have is, so for instance, this tagline, with many powerful ninja, ranger, and specialization cards, History Pack 1 supports 4 of the 6 heroes featured in Outsiders. Now, this article is a little bit old, but I also don't like this, right? Because the history product is curated, meaning that it doesn't include all the cards from the sets that it pulls from, right? Meaning that it won't stand the test of time. If the meta shifts enough and those cards that were excluded then become necessary, there is going to be issues with the history products. Do they come up with a new history product that then has the cards that they excluded? You know, how does that work in the numbering? It all gets a little bit muddled and confusing. Another thing I would love to see, right? They're pushing it a lot in the articles, but I rarely see stores do it, especially here in Australia. I've seen a few do it in the US. Obviously, I don't buy from them because shipping would be a nightmare, but to bundle things together, right? To have the Blitz decks bundled with a box, so you can play Blitz, you can open packs, and then you can play Classic Constructed. To really push that mentality if we're not getting Classic Constructed precons. And of course, the, obviously, Battles Rhina versus Dorinthia, another great way to reprint staple cards in certain heroes, and by and large, I think we should, see a lot more of them and a lot more often. Right? We should really be cycling through the majority of heroes. We have so many heroes at this point that we're really falling behind in terms of these classic battle decks. Right, to not even see a Bravo X Batsu one or something like that is a bit astounding at this point. Right, I'd almost like to see them in between every set, have one come out. Again, I want to draw attention to this sort of mentality. So History Pack 1 provides almost everything a player needs in one easy place, and we highly recommend stocking up on it so that your shelves are well equipped with the essentials for a long term. Now, my understanding is that the History Pack will never be out of print. Right? It can be called upon as necessary to supply the growing community in relation to the amount of available cards. So stocking up with them now doesn't seem as much as a necessity as what this sort of comment makes, right? And again, this long-term mentality. The real demand for the history packs isn't going to be seen until there is, very, very little movement in the sets that it comprises. Because again, the incentive to open a history pack versus any of the original products, unless we see really skyrocketed prices, potentially like what we're seeing with Arcane Rising, I would never advocate for someone to open a history pack over opening X set looking for X cards. Because again, you have to dig through so many different cards to find the cards you might want, and then you also have this idea that this is the lesser version, right? The wide border is meant to be less desirable. It's definitely a little bit of a pickle, right? Because again, this is meant to correct for the movement away from unlimited and first edition boxes, but at the same time, I don't think it does enough, and it's also way too early. Altogether, I just don't like the curated mentality, because again, it skips over cards, right? It still includes a lot of bulk. Rares and commons aren't really a necessity, especially once we get to the 2.0 sets. So I still do strongly advocate for some sort of shake-up or change to the way that the history products work. Again, Black Label is fantastic in jump-starting the game globally and in markets where it hasn't penetrated, right? But in the markets where we do already see cards and do already see some success for Flesh and Blood, I don't think the history product is capable of doing everything it should in its current iteration. Anyway, that should be it for news, right? So the big thing, again, is really just the update to the use of organized play materials, mainly the casual support, and the fact that, again, Legendary Studios are showing themselves to be wonderful listeners of their community and really take the thoughts and feelings of their community on board, right? We've seen that with the Dusk Till Dawn update, as well as art cards being in both printings, and now we're seeing it with the continued support for casual play.